15 years after I left Maplebridge with nothing but a duffel bag and a hollow heart, a cream-colored envelope found me, and it had my mother's handwriting on it. It was a Tuesday, the kind of gray morning that pulled your shoulders inward without realizing it. Rain tapped gently against the kitchen window, a soft percussion I'd grown used to in this part of Chicago. My tea had gone lukewarm beside the sink. I was rinsing out a small clay pot when I spotted the envelope tucked between a utilities bill and an alumni fundraiser card. Heavy stock, cream colored, my initials in calligraphy I hadn't seen since I was 21, but I'd know that hand anywhere. Margaret Whitfield didn't just write, she carved her name onto paper like a commandment. I stood there for a long time. The pot is still dripping water between my fingers. I hadn't heard from her in 15 years. No calls, no letters, not even a birthday card forwarded through some cousin. But there it was, an invitation, unmistakable in its elegance, unapologetic in its timing. My sister's name was embossed in gold. Elise Whitfield, MD, honoring a decade of impact in community health. The location, Maplebridge Town Hall. The date, 3 weeks from now. There was no note, no, we hope you'll come, no, we miss you. Just the date, the address, and a time, formal and flawless. My mother's signature move. I laid the envelope flat on the counter, careful not to crumple the corners. Then I made myself a second cup of tea, stronger this time, and sat down at the kitchen table. My hand trembled slightly as I reached for my laptop and opened a folder I hadn't touched in years. It was labeled Maplebridge Foreclosure Only. Inside were files I didn't let myself delete: a scanned photo from senior year, an unfinished scholarship essay, a blurry image of the house I once called home. I clicked through slowly, each click of a door creaking open. But the one thing that stayed the same, more than the faces, more than the accusations, was the silence. The thick, deliberate kind that suffocates louder than words ever could. That envelope was a reminder, not of family, but of the erasure I had worked so hard to survive. A knock at my door snapped me back. Benji's voice followed, muffled. "It's me, Chica. You leave your tea steeping too long again?" I unlocked the door, and he stepped inside, shaking the drizzle off his jacket. He carried 2 paper bags, and that same grin he always wore when he thought I was spiraling. "I brought bagels," he said, setting them down, "and the look on your face tells me I brought them just in time." I didn't say anything, just slid the envelope across the table. He picked it up and read the first few lines, then slowly exhaled. "Well, damn. That about sums it up," I said. Benji sat down and pulled one of the bagels out of the bag. Poppy seed, my favorite. "You gonna go?" "I don't know yet." "You always know. You just wait until it hurts less to say it." I sipped my tea, now properly strong. "They want something." "They always did," he said quietly. We didn't speak for a few minutes. He let me sit with it, like he always did, and then, with a kind of reverence, I opened the envelope again. There was nothing hidden, no note, no added message. Just the gilded performance of an invitation. "They want me there," I said. "But not because I matter, because I don't. Not anymore, not to them." "Then why would you go?" I stared at the invitation. The gold letters, my name, misspelled slightly, like an afterthought, on the envelope. "Because I need to remember who I am." Benji reached over and took my hand. "Then go. But don't go to be seen. Go to see for yourself how far you've come." That night I couldn't sleep. I walked the floor of my small apartment, pausing by the window as the city lights blinked back at me through fogged-up glass. In the reflection, I barely recognized the girl I used to be, the one who left Maplebridge carrying shame like luggage. I opened the closet and reached for the black duffel I'd kept tucked away for no real reason. Old habit, maybe, maybe hope. I dusted it off, folded 2 days' worth of clothes, a good coat, the gray scarf Benji gave me the year we met. Then I paused, not for drama, for clarity. As she zips up her overnight bag, Benji asks, "Are you sure about this?" I replied softly, "It's not about them anymore." Maplebridge looked the same, pumpkin wreaths on every porch, fog over the lake. but it felt like walking through someone else's memory. The bus dropped me off at a gas station that doubled as a coffee stand. I stepped out into air that smelled like wet leaves and wood smoke. It was early enough that the streets were mostly quiet, the town still stretching its limbs. I paused near the old public library. The stone steps had cracks I remembered tracing with my fingers as a child. A cluster of red and orange leaves circled the base like a seasonal offering. I walked the 2 blocks to Main Street with my duffel bag pulling on one shoulder and something heavier pulling inside my chest. The storefronts hadn't changed much. Maple Bridge Pharmacy, a secondhand bookshop, that tiny pet grooming place with the cartoon golden retriever in the window. But the colors were sharper now, or maybe it was just me seeing them through different eyes. The diner came into view before I even realized my feet had taken me there. Hattie's Diner, still standing, still red and white, still humming faintly with a Patsy Cline song that drifted through the open front door. The little bell chimed as I stepped inside. The warmth hit me first, then the scent. Coffee, bacon, something sweet in the oven. It was quieter than I remembered. A couple of older men played checkers at the window booth. A waitress wiped down a counter, and then Hattie turned around. She didn't say a word for a second, just looked at me. Her eyes didn't widen in surprise or narrow in judgment. They softened. She reached for a mug and started pouring coffee without breaking eye contact. I wondered when I'd see that face again, she said finally, her voice like cracked leather softened by use. I tried to speak, but my throat wouldn't cooperate. She slid the coffee toward me. Sit, sweetheart. Don't make me stand here and fuss at you in front of the whole town. I sat. She sat too, across from me. The mug between us sent up gentle steam. You hungry? Maybe in a minute, I said. Hattie reached over and patted my hand once, then leaned back. You got taller. I smiled. You got bolder. She grinned. Well, the town shrunk a bit while you were gone, or maybe it just stopped pretending. I looked around. Does it still pretend much? Only when there's press, she said, eyes twinkling. We talked, but not about the past. She told me about COVID and how it nearly sank the place, about losing 2 waitresses and half the Saturday breakfast crowd, about putting her mortgage into the fryer to keep the lights on. I didn't ask for details. She wouldn't give them, but her knuckles tightened around the edge of the table when she spoke about the loan officer who promised help and never called back. A man shuffled in, holding a canvas tote full of papers. Morning, Hattie, he called, then stopped when he saw me. Oh, my stars, is that Iris? I stood before he even made it to the table. Mr. Klein? He smiled, his eyebrows lifting like shutters opening to sunlight. Still the brightest writer I ever taught. Are you going to read my memoir now? I'd be honored. He sat near us and started telling a story about my 7th-grade essay on Amelia Earhart. Hattie winked at me and slipped a plate in front of me. Scrambled eggs, sourdough toast, and a tiny side of sliced apples dusted with cinnamon. I hadn't ordered, but she knew. After breakfast, I stepped outside. The fog had lifted slightly. I walked toward the inn I'd booked, passing the town square. A large billboard stood near the community center. Join us in honoring Dr. Elise Whitfield, our hometown health hero. Her picture looked like a campaign poster. White coat, perfect teeth, a caption about resilience. My stomach turned. I crossed to the town hall and paused at a bulletin board near the steps. One flyer flapped in the wind, its edges yellowed. I leaned closer. It was a missing person notice. My face, 15 years younger. The word missing faded, but legible. A phone number, disconnected, I was sure. And at the bottom, the line, beloved daughter. If seen, please contact Margaret or Douglas Whitfield. I reached up and peeled it off, folded it once, slipped it into my coat pocket. As I returned to the inn, a teenager held the door and asked, Are you really Iris Whitfield? I didn't expect them to welcome me home. I just didn't expect the town to pretend I never left. The next morning, I walked down Maple Avenue just as the sky shifted from gray to pale blue. People passed by with nods that lingered too long, eyes that searched for recognition but offered none. At Hattie's, someone had left a pecan pie on the counter with a note that read, "For the one who remembered how to make it right." Hattie said nothing, just cut me a slice and poured coffee. I took it to go and headed toward the library. The building still smelled like old paper and lemon cleaner. It was quiet in that way only libraries in small towns are, where silence isn't just expected, it's enforced by the weight of memories. Mrs. Linden, the librarian, looked up but didn't seem to place me. I didn't correct her. I found a table near the back and opened my laptop. The Wi-Fi was slow but steady. I typed in the address to the old student blog where everything had started to fall apart. I hadn't looked in over a decade, didn't even know it still existed. But it did, and it still had the post. The Real Iris Whitfield, A Tale of Theft and Victimhood. No author, of course, but the tone was unmistakable. There were phrases only someone in my family would have known, details twisted just enough to sound true, just enough to make people believe. I clicked through the archive and found 3 other entries. One was a critique of my academic entitlement, another accused me of manipulating professors, and a third implied that I had fabricated the story about losing my grant. Each one bore the same timestamp pattern. I copied the source code and sent it to Sylvia. Sylvia Tran was a freelance journalist I'd met years ago in a writing workshop. We'd kept in touch through the occasional email. She was the only one who believed me back then when I said I didn't just lose everything, it was taken. Her response came 10 minutes later. Definitely fake account. IP link to your family's home server. Want me to dig further? I typed back, please. I spent the rest of the afternoon walking. The wind had picked up, carrying the sharpness of November. Holiday lights were starting to appear in storefronts. A garland hung around the window of the bakery, and a snowman made of grapevines sat by the post office steps. I passed high school. The bulletin board out front featured an old photo of Elise accepting an award. The caption beneath read, Scholarship Winner, Women in Health Sciences 2007. The title of her project, Nutritional Support in Underserved Communities, a Grassroots Approach. It was mine, word for word. I stood there so long that someone honked from a passing car, mistaking my stillness for hesitation. I turned and kept walking, but the words chased me. Back at the inn, I rummaged through the side pocket of my duffel bag and pulled out a thumb drive. I plugged it in. There, under a folder labeled Thesis Drafts, was my original document, date-stamped, annotated, 8 months of work. Elise hadn't even changed the phrasing, just moved my name off the top. A knock at the door startled me. I cracked it open to find the innkeeper holding up a small manila envelope. This came for you, she said, dropped off by hand. Inside was a single page, a transcript from Elise's college years, course titles, grades, a fake-looking signature at the bottom. The capstone was listed as mine, with her name. The professor's endorsement was photocopied from a document I still had on file. No return name, just a sticky note. You're not crazy. I closed the door and locked it behind me. That night, she opens her folder and whispers, I'm not imagining this, and now I have proof. They tried to write me out of the story. I came back with a pen and a ledger. The morning fog still hugged the sidewalks when Sylvia's rental car pulled up in front of the inn. She stepped out in jeans, a navy pea coat, and the same no-nonsense boots she wore the last time we marched into an editor's office with a folder of hard truths. She carried a slim briefcase and the kind of exhaustion only people who've spent years chasing silence can wear like armor. We hugged without ceremony. She didn't ask how I was, just said, I have everything. Upstairs in my room, we spread the papers across the bed. Screen captures, dated drafts, metadata trails, copied course descriptions from Elise's alma mater. There was a spreadsheet, too. Grants that bore her name, but contained entire paragraphs from my original applications. She didn't even bother to change formatting, Sylvia muttered. This isn't just sloppy. It's confident, like she never thought anyone would come looking. I nodded, quietly taking in the pile. I'd imagined this moment 1,000 times, but it still made my breath catch to see the theft so neatly documented. This was no longer a memory. This was recorded. By noon, A knock at the door broke our focus. I opened it to find Benji, arms full of snacks, and one travel-sized humidifier. "You said this place gets drafty," he said, "and I come bearing moral support in the form of red vines and dried mango." He caught sight of the papers and whistled low. "Wow, you weren't kidding." We spent the afternoon building a folder of digestible truth, just enough to make an impact without overwhelming. Sylvia coached me through what to say if asked, how to cite without accusing, how to stand without folding. Later at Hattie's, she brought us sweet tea and leftover pecan crumble. She didn't say anything when she noticed the edge of a document poking out from my bag. She just refilled our mugs and patted my shoulder. "Whatever it is," she said softly, "they'll hear you this time." We nodded in unison. Sometimes a stranger's belief lands harder than family ever could. I went for a walk after dinner, alone. The wind had picked up, rattling the last leaves from the trees. I passed the town square where a banner now fluttered above the stage steps. "The Whitfield Family Presents," a celebration of health and heritage. It made me feel something colder than anger. Not rage, revision, the kind that rewrites history with ribboned edges and expects no one to notice. Just as I turned back, I saw a figure near the church steps. Douglas, my father. We locked eyes. He didn't smile, but he didn't look away. I thought he might walk over, say something rehearsed. Instead, he nodded. Not warm, not apologetic, but perhaps, in his way, an acknowledgement. I didn't respond. Back at the inn, Sylvia and Benji had cleared the bed. The documents were tucked into two neat folders, one of which now bore a post-it labeled "Stage Copy" for reading only. I zipped it into my tote, my fingers tracing the edge like it was something sacred. I sat down by the window as a wind whispered through the cracked glass, my breath fogged slightly on the pane. "You okay?" Benji asked, setting down the last of the tea. I nodded, but he didn't let it go. He crouched beside me, resting a hand on my arm. "You know this isn't about proving them wrong, right?" I looked at him. "It's about reminding yourself you were always right." That night, as I brushed my hair and folded my scarf for the next day, the silence in the room wasn't heavy anymore. It was waiting, poised. Benji says quietly before bed, "You're not crashing their event, Iris. You're rewriting it." They gave Elise a microphone. I brought the truth and a calm voice. Maple Bridge Town Hall had never looked so carefully curated. Garlands of dried leaves and miniature pumpkins lined the windowsills, and soft amber light glowed from vintage sconces. Someone had arranged folding chairs in perfect rows, each one adorned with a small card that read, "With gratitude." At the back, a punch table gleamed with glass bowls and two sweet cider. I stood near the doors, Benji beside me, both of us watching as the crowd slowly filled the room. My mother had taken her usual place near the front, chin lifted slightly, shawl folded tightly around her shoulders like armor. Douglas sat beside her, still and unreadable. Elise stood off to the side of the stage, greeting donors, hugging former teachers. Her posture, her voice, her clothes, everything carefully rehearsed. You'd think she was accepting a humanitarian award, not whitewashing a history no one had ever questioned. The mayor took the stage first, welcoming the crowd and praising the Whitfields for their enduring legacy. There were mentions of community health, family values, and local pride. I barely heard the words. I was watching Elise, how she smoothed her blazer 3 times before walking to the microphone. Her speech was flawless. She thanked the town, spoke of sacrifices, of perseverance, of her family's unwavering support. There were polite laughs when she mentioned long nights in medical school, knowing glances exchanged when she touched on hometown roots. She quoted a psalm, then shifted to a Robert Frost line. The crowd soaked it in. I didn't hear her voice anymore. I heard Hattie's instead from years ago. "Let 'em look polished, you. Be honest, that shines longer." When she finished, applause echoed through the hall like an automatic response. And then, open remarks. I stood. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't push through rows or raise my voice. I simply stepped forward, hand steady, folder tucked beneath one arm. The microphone adjusted with a small metallic squeak. Whispers rose like a tide as I took the stage. "Good evening," I said. "My name is Iris Whitfield." The murmurs quieted. I scanned the room. Familiar faces, former teachers, old neighbors. Some looked stunned, some didn't look at all. I came back to Maplebridge not to stir up history, but to return to mine. I laid the folder on the podium and opened it. This project, Nutritional Support in Underserved Communities, was mine, written in 2007. The title, the structure, the data collection, these are my original drafts, time-stamped, annotated. The final version was submitted under a different name, this one. I tapped the program still clutched in someone's lap. Elise's face smiling up in gloss. Gasps. I continued calmly. This isn't about taking anything from anyone. It's about restoring truth. About reminding this town that stories don't vanish because we stop telling them. They vanish because someone else tells them louder. Margaret stood abruptly. "This is not the time," she said, voice sharp, cutting through the stillness. I didn't turn toward her. "You had 15 years. A hush followed, the kind that prickles. I turned to the crowd, opened another page. Blog posts, IP traced, course catalog mismatches, grant application overlaps. This isn't bitterness, this is clarity. Someone in the third row, a man in a suit jacket with a donor badge, leaned toward his companion and whispered, audibly enough, "This was hers, wasn't it?" Elise's foot tapped, barely visible, but there. Margaret clutched her shawl tighter. I closed the folder. "Thank you." And I stepped back. As Iris leaves the podium, Hattie stands, claps once. Slowly, others follow. Margaret stays seated, jaw set, unmoving. I didn't come to be forgiven. I came to stop asking for space in my own story. Thanksgiving morning arrived with a soft, golden hush. Maplebridge had always quieted on holidays. The air felt different, less guarded, more honest. I rose before the sun created the trees, pulled on an old sweater, and walked to Hattie's diner. She was already there, unlocking the front door with the same care one might give to a church. "You're early," she said, not unkindly. "So are you." She smiled faintly and nodded toward the back. "Coffee's already brewing. You know where the aprons are." We worked in near silence, prepping trays of biscuits, slicing ham, setting out ceramic plates she refused to replace with paper ones. "Dignity doesn't take a holiday," she always said. By 7, the first of the regulars trickled in, a widower who always brought his own syrup, a young mom with 2 toddlers, and no family nearby, an older couple who used to run the flower shop. They didn't ask why I was there. They just passed the rolls and poured cream into chip mugs. At noon, Hattie paused behind the counter and looked at me for a long time. "You didn't have to do this." "I wanted to," I said. She glanced at the quiet crowd, the low hum of conversation, the plate of cinnamon bread someone had left on the porch. "Well, I'm glad you did." I left a sealed envelope on her office chair that afternoon. Inside was a check, not flashy, just enough to cover the rest of her mortgage. No note, no signature, just a sticky tab on the back that read, "For the ones who stayed open when others shut their doors." Later that day, I returned to the inn and packed my things without ceremony. No dramatic last look, just a quiet nod to the town that had shaped me, then buried me, then, unexpectedly, made space for my return. Margaret never called. Elise didn't show her face after the town hall event. A voicemail came through sometime around midnight, but I let it fade into digital dust. It wasn't an apology, not really, just noise trying to rewrite itself again. Benji drove us back to Chicago the next morning. He played old Motown songs on low volume and didn't talk much. Neither did I. Some silences are companions, not voids. A few days later, I sat at my desk and opened a blank blog post. I didn't overthink it, just typed what I needed to say. To the ones who were rewritten, this is your reminder to start over. I posted it, closed the laptop, and didn't wait for reactions. The next morning, I woke to soft sunlight pouring through the kitchen window. I brewed a small pot of coffee and stood barefoot on the tile, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant thrum of city life. I looked at the windowsill, where a new plant had started to bloom, a gift from Hattie, who claimed it only grows for stubborn people. I smiled, no headlines, no applause, no more explanations. I sipped coffee in my sunlit kitchen, windows cracked open. There's no soundtrack, just silence. and it finally feels like mine. There are moments in life when we stop waiting to be seen and start seeing ourselves clearly. I didn't return to ask for permission. I came to reclaim what should never have been taken. Kindness, even when quiet and unpaid, has a way of echoing louder than resentment. And sometimes the bravest thing we can do is tell our story, not to wound, but to heal. So take a moment today. Look around. Is there someone who once offered you grace in silence? Maybe now is your turn to let that grace ripple outward. Like a porch light left on through the night, a small act of truth can guide others home.